which has been very, very focused in relation to subject, not focused in relation to the organisation, the way they're thinking about the organisation and themselves as a part of that organisation, and how that's affecting the way they're engaging with others and the others are engaging with them. You see, we've got a picture here of just two people interacting with these mental images, the pink square and the yellow triangle in their minds, which actually is affecting what how they talk, the tone of voice, the words they use, the concepts and tools and the judgments that they make, the efforts they make in terms of, you know, power and authority between them. All that's going to be going on without really being fully processed and worked through. Now, we've got a little pair there and a little trio. Just scale that up to a company of, say, 20 employees, or 100 employees, or thousands of employees, and you begin to see the kind of sort of huge stew of unresolved issues which are in danger of just clashing with each other and creating overload, complexity, confusion, etc. And if the solution to dealing with this, which has been coming from elsewhere, is passed the buck to somebody else to resolve, that is only going to compound the situation. So we have to be able to take into account the ideas in the mind, the picture in the mind, the organization in the mind, which is what is actually framing how people think about what they're saying and how they hear what is being said to them. So A and B begin to be able to, instead of probably going away and doing something completely different from what the other expected, they begin to be able to work in some kind of coordinated way, which is based on a shared idea rather than simply a process of command and control. But there's always the fact that the work at it, we're not all sailing along in a very efficient boat which is able to harness the power of the waves and the sea in order to get where we want to go. The whole thing is taking place within field force, which are changing what's actually going on. So the pictures in the minds of the people who are involved, in their tens, their hundreds or thousands, are all being influenced by the kind of weather in which they find themselves, weather in quotes, of course, and the weather isn't fine. So, working life is always lived, this is a working hypothesis, working life is always lived on the cusp of chaos, confusion. That is the natural state of any human organization. And what we're seeking to do, all of us, is to try to make sense of what it is we need to be able to cut, and how do we handle issues to do with confusion and gridlock which erupt around us all the time. There are a series of questions which we need to ask in order to understand what's happening to us and around us and being affected by us on the basis of the elements which we've been taught about, which one needs to be able to be hanging on to in one's mind. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is the purpose of our cooperation? And the purpose of our cooperation isn't simply coming from inside ourselves, and we have to work hard to clarify what comes from inside ourselves. We have to relate that to a context, to a setting in which it's taking place, so that those squares and triangles take into account the fact that the winds are blowing and the sea is getting choppy, or otherwise. The wind may be fair or it may be against us, and we have to recognize that's a factor which will be with. And because we're looking at things from different positions, but also with different sets of presuppositions, we have to ask ourselves, how do our different parts fit together? Not how they ought to. That leads us into the command and control kind of set of assumptions. But how are they fitting together? they may actually be fitting together far better than we realize once we begin to take all the factors into account. So we've got a purpose and intention, we've got different parts which we're asking how they fit together in relation to that purpose, then we have the being drawn. Boundaries are that point at which we say there's things which are inside this boundary and things which are outside that boundary. Boundaries are not barriers, they're like semi-permeable membranes, like our skin. Stuff goes in through our skin, but also stuff is coming out through our skin all the time. And where we draw the boundaries is not necessarily in our behavior, is not necessarily where we think they ought to be when we try and draw them in terms of organizational diagrams. In fact, many organizational diagrams are simply trees and don't differentiate the boundaries between the different functions. They leave that up to the person who is higher up the tree to be able to determine what belongs here and what belongs there and what has got to be separated and what's got to be brought together. So then what other boundaries are relevant to what we are doing where we are? Because they may be unexpected boundaries, things we may be being affected, for example, by the way in which the receptionist who receives people at the entrance to our office, the frame of mind in which the client finally sits down with me, may have been very importantly influenced by the way the receptionist handled things. And that's a simple example, but one can undoubtedly think of others where different parts of the organization, the way people keep to time, the way people actually do their preparation, and how that passes on. And in terms of what we're thinking about, this is really critical to bear in mind. Then, what's happening in the context, and how is that affecting what we're going on? Now, at the present moment, across the globe, we're all concerned about the problems of the financial systems and their capacity to be able to take full account of the impact of the way in which finances have been handled, controlled, people have been able to make money or lose money. All of that is affecting us all in terms of a state of crisis and collapse. Then there's another assumption which each of us is making about power and authority. And these can be related to one's sense of very easily feeling vulnerable, or when facing somebody who is seen to be more senior than oneself, one begins to lose contact with one's own capacities. Similarly, those people in positions or senior positions in an organization may feel very vulnerable and unsure of themselves, and consequently behave in very defensive ways. So power and authority, built on previous experience, questions to do with race and gender and so on, all affect how we make assumptions about power and authority, and how we then may behave in order to confirm or at least move us into a position which we're familiar with, so that we can handle the demands, the pressures, the relatedness which are around us. So then we're beginning to take into account all the different kinds of forces and factors that are influencing how we work together. See, one of the assumptions which is made again and again, and is being very much questioned in all the kind of organizational thinking and so on, that the idea is that organizations are kind of machines which human beings can design, rather like engineers, with placing people in right positions so that they transmit forces and energy just the same as if they were rods, connecting rods, or connecting pieces of wire that take charge and energy from one place to another. Working on a Newtonian thinking about physics. Well, modern physics is